Okay, so hi everybody and welcome. If you're looking for Cabernet Can, you made it here. This is Autism Awareness Month here at ONEHOPE, and we're going to talk about what our Cabernet can do. And we are going to go from grape to glass and everything in between and discover about this amazing grape and these wines. I'm Mari Coyle, Director of Wine here at ONEHOPE, and I'm passionate about our wines, California wines, the Napa Valley, where we have the home to our estate winery, which is being built, and our own estate Cabernet vineyard. So very incredible, very passionate about Cabernet. I've spent the last few years really honing in on Cabernet after about 20 years of winemaking experience. And I can say it is super challenging and yet super rewarding. Cabernet is a grape like no other. So I'm really excited to share some information tonight and taste some wines and really have a good time with you guys. The recording of this presentation will be in VIA University by the end of the week or early next week. If you can't make it or you'd like to reference the presentation slides or send somebody new, one of your friends, or host a party like some people are doing tonight and watch it all over again, I'd love to hear from you in the chat box. So go ahead and put your comments in there, and when I can come to a pause, I will go ahead and answer your questions. If anybody's just joining, I see a few new participants popping on. Welcome to Cabernet Can. I am Mari. Welcome. All right, happy Tuesday, everybody. This is super exciting. We haven't done a lot of Cabernet tastings together, and so it's just always the big one, the obvious one, and sometimes we work with grapes that are lesser known or wines that people haven't heard of, and we give those priority attention. And tonight we're talking about the king. We are talking about Cabernet. So here it is with all of its glory and crown. Welcome, everybody, for those of you just joining. Cabernet is king, and that is just a known fact. Cab is king. If Cab is king, we say that Chardonnay is queen, because Cabernet is king for many reasons. It's grown in premier regions around the world, starting with Bordeaux, but also including California. Much of California, it's the #1 red grape variety planted in California. It's grown in Australia. It's really grown in a lot of premier regions. And so because of that, it is world-renowned in a lot of great wines that we drink and in a lot of blends. It's called the noble grape. And I love referring to this because I remember when I first heard that Cabernet was the noble grape, and I was like, well, what does that mean? What does that really mean? But what's hard to understand until you've gone out into a vineyard and tasted a lot of grapes is that it is so complex. What Cabernet actually offers as a berry, so the berry is actually the fruit on the cluster, we call that berries. It's like a grape. A grape is a berry. So I wanted to make sure everybody has that same vocabulary. But the berry itself is so complex. It ranges from having, peppery characteristics to red fruit like raspberry, dark raspberry, and cherry, all the way into blueberry and blackberry, and everything in between. It's super complex. The seeds in grapes, so wine grapes have seeds. They're not like the ones that we buy at the grocery store. They have seeds. And those seeds are a main component of what we call tannin in the wine. And those seeds actually taste like chocolate when they're ripe. I think that's my favorite part of Cabernet, is these really chocolatey seeds. They're so ripe that they taste delicious. They're like nutty and chocolatey. So Cabernet is the noble grape because of its complexities. And even though we can get super complex with our winemaking practices and grow it in premier regions, it by itself has a lot going for it. And that's one of the reasons why we say Cabernet is king. And then we talk about the age-worthy tannin structure. So wines that are meant to age oftentimes have these tannins, like I talked about, that come from the skins, and the seeds. And these tannins are really what build the body of a wine and have structure that allows like time-honored cellaring. So allows for those tannins to soften over time while you still have a very robust wine. So it's very exciting. The potential for Cabernet is amazing, and we have two great wines to taste tonight that do a really good job just showing what Cabernet can do in the vineyard. And we haven't even talked about what it can do in this world, right? To change our world with Autism Awareness Month this week. So super exciting stuff here. And I'm going to go over here to the next slide where I just sort of mentioned a few winemaking techniques. I mentioned something about the seeds and the skins and where the tannins come from. So I want to talk really quickly about recapping here on red winemaking. If you've joined us for Grape to Glass, then you do know we usually go over the winemaking technique. So for some of you, you've seen this before. It's a good refresher. Some people might not have seen this yet. So red grapes, that's what we start with. And I want to also tonight really emphasize that grapes are our number one ingredient in wine. It's everything. The grapes have juice, which is, you know, a source of liquid or water, and they have color in the skins, and they have tannins in the seeds, and they have flavor in the fruit itself. So each of those berries on that cluster has flavor, and that is where wine becomes the most complex and interesting beverage, arguably, on the planet, is because this fruit is really interesting, and it is the number one ingredient in wine. And it is why we make wine out of grapes instead of other fruits. For instance, raspberries or blueberries or blackberries, and you might have had one of those wines. But if you've had a fruit wine before as comparison, you might notice that it's not very complex. It's pretty straightforward. It tastes like blueberry. Or if you had blackberry wine, it tastes like blackberry. But when you have grape wine, it doesn't taste like grape all the time. It tastes like blackberry and blueberry, or a combination of raspberry and chocolate, and it has a lot going on. And so I think sometimes we underappreciate the grape itself and how important it is. And that's really what I wanted to emphasize here, is that our number one ingredient is red grapes. And we're getting these Cabernet grapes from premium vineyards. In the case of our California Cabernet, this wine comes from lots of different vineyards throughout California, where we have unique soil types. We have a maritime influence from rivers and lakes and oceans. We have a lot of different soil types to choose from. We have warm inland valleys, and we have the North Coast, where we have cooler temperatures. So a combination of a lot of different places is what makes up the blend for our California Cabernet. And mostly we're in areas that are warm, that ripen grapes, so that we can get this really opulent expression of fruit. And those fruits I was talking about range from like that cherry and dark cherry, black cherry, into blackberry and blueberry. So, so that's where we start with our grapes, our most important ingredient in wine. We don't add any flavors. We don't add any raspberries. We don't ferment it with a touch of blueberries, although sometimes I think that would be super fun if we could, but we actually can't. I mean, we can't do that. So in beer, you know, you can have like a grapefruit beer that was fermented with grapefruit, or you can have spruce tip beer that had spruce tips, but in wine, you have grapes. And that is the sole and most important ingredient. And from that gives all this range of profile and tasting notes. So anyway, mind blown, again, after 20-something years of being in the wine industry. When I think about this stuff, I think, I can't believe how cool this beverage really is, right? Is anybody else thinking that? It's like, oh my gosh, So cool, right? So then with our Napa Valley Cabernet, we're sourcing our grapes from Napa Valley, which is a small geographical region within California. If you haven't been to Napa Valley yet, and I'm saying yet because I hope you guys will come over and join us sometime, or maybe some of you are leaders earning a leader day, or maybe some of you are going to be visiting Napa Valley on your way to Crush or after Crush to visit vineyards and check out and do some wine tasting. But Napa Valley is one of the most famous world-renowned wine regions, primarily growing Cabernet Sauvignon. And so this is a really special bottle from this very small region, which is really influenced with a maritime cooling at night and warming during the day. And so that cooling at night helps the berries and the grapes and the vine restore itself and be ready for the next day of full sun, warm days, and ripening, flavors and tannins, which result in textures and aromas. So really, really cool area, not cold, but a very awesome, amazing area that we're really proud of. And of course, we now are going to be opening our new estate in Rutherford, Napa Valley, where we grow our iconic estate blocks 1 and block 2 Cabernet in our iconic collection. So we have a broad range of Cabernets to celebrate this month of autism awareness, and both of these wines do that and give back to ABA therapy, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we start off with red winemaking with grapes themselves that are very important, and they come from these different parts of California, or for international wines from around the world. And we ferment those on their skins first. So what happens is we take the stem out with a machine, the stem comes out, and we just have the grapes with the skins, the juice, and the seeds, and that's what we call our must. And what we do is we ferment that. So it's already a liquid. It's sort of like a heavy liquid, like if you were to crush up some fruit in a cup or a bowl, and you'd have kind of a muddle. It's like a muddled fruit. So you have this fruit, and then we ferment it, which means we take that sugar and we convert it to alcohol. And after we're done with that process, we now have red wine that is soft in tannins, rich in color, and really, really interesting in its alcohol instead of sugar. So we went from juice to wine. So in that process, using yeast. It's a really neat process, and it's the way in which we pick up that color from the skins. Did you guys know that there are only 2 grape varieties that actually have red juice? So the color actually comes from the skins, because the juice itself, when you squeeze a berry, is actually clear. So kind of fascinating. 2 grape varieties. They're called Alicante Bouschet and Ruby Red. And they're 2 grapes that can sometimes be found in wine, but are often used for natural coloring of, gummy fruit snacks or different juices. So they're used for a natural way to color different foods and beverages. So after we've made wine, and we have wine of approximately 14% alcohol, more or less, we then take that wine and age it in oak barrels. And we're using a combination of French and American oak on our California Cabernet, and we're using exclusively French oak on our Napa Valley Cabernet. And did anybody see Oak Part 1 or Part 2 in the last Tuesday's Q&A on Facebook? I can't see all of you. But anyway, we've been talking a lot about oak. So you can learn a lot about oak on Tuesday's 10:30 Q&A. And you can learn a lot about that whole process and why we're aging in oak. But for today, we want to talk about aging in this oak on our California Cabernet is about 10 to 12 months in oak, which would be a combination of French and American. And then for our Napa Valley, we're looking at approximately 18 to 20 months. So why the different time aged in oak? Why? Good question. I'm so glad that you asked. I think Tom asked that question. I'm pretty sure Tom was just asking that. Why the difference in aging? So the difference really is in the massive structure. So when we ferment on the skins and seeds and we have that tannin, we have a lot of tannin from some vineyards and not quite as much tannin from other vineyards. And that's why our California Cabernet is so approachable, easy to drink, enjoyable, smooth, rich, opulent. Our Napa Valley Cabernet has a little bit more tannin because it was grown in this very small geographical region that produces a lot of tannin. And so because of that, we want to soften it for longer and we want to add that barrel complexity. What does anybody know what winemakers call barrels as a tool? Like if I was in the kitchen, just wondering if anybody picked this up from Q&A in the last couple of weeks. You can type it into the chat box. Oops, somebody's typing in something and I can't see it. So what we call barrels from a winemaking perspective is our spice rack. This is where a lot of our spices come into play. Our vanilla, our clove, our nutmeg, our allspice, all of those things are typically not found in grapes. They're found in the winemaking process and the barrel aging process. And we're gonna see some of those pop up as we uncork these wines tonight. And you're gonna know exactly where they came from. It's gonna be so cool. So then we have that wine aged sort of to perfection when we get just the right amount of tannin and complexity and structure and softness and richness. And then that wine is blended with other barrels and bottled. And that's what results here. All right, I don't know about you guys, but I am definitely getting thirsty. Is anybody getting thirsty? It's like all this talking and I haven't even opened the wines. Tom already opened his wines. I'm watching him in Santa Ana. He's like, heck with this. I am opening these. So everybody's getting their swirl on. I love it. Okay, well, let's open these up. So I always like to show, I'm gonna go back here so I can make sure I'm showing. I always like to show you guys, anybody that's new or you just want a pro tip on opening a bottle of wine. I think it can be intimidating sometimes, especially when a bunch of people are looking at you and there's 30 people at your tasting and they all want to taste wine now and you're trying to open it and the foil's not cooperating and the cork breaks. Has anybody had that happen? Anyway, so I want you to take your corkscrew. This is just like the ones that we have, our ONEHOPE corkscrews. And I hate to say that all of mine have now been officially confiscated in the airports. So I now don't have any more. I think the airport owns all of my corkscrews. But I've got this one that will suffice. And so we've got a knife here. And we also have the corkscrew itself. And then this is a little fulcrum here. And we're going to use all three of those parts. But for the knife, I actually like to take the bottle of wine, and you'll see there's this lip underneath where that's part of the glass mold. And I like to take and place the knife right under that lip, under the glass mold, and just get a good grip right there. And then I wrap it around underneath that glass lip. And I cut the foil and pull it off, and voila. You've got a nice, clean look to your cork. To your foil, sorry. And I'm gonna go ahead and open this one too at the same time because we're going to decant one of our wines because everybody always wants to decant something. Why not? This is one to do. If you want to decant something, you can do the Napa Valley Cab. It's a good one to decant. So I brought my handy dandy decanter. So then when you go to open and take out the cork, you're actually going to use that corkscrew part, but you're also going to use your fulcrum right here on the side, the neck of the bottle, and you're going to lift up partially and then secondary, and there you go. So now you've got everything ready to go. If you totally mess up the foil and it looks really messy and you're not happy about it, you can just rip it off too, right? I like to do that. So with Napa Valley, I'm gonna go ahead and you guys are funny. I decant, I can. You are so funny. I'm gonna go ahead and pour some right here in my decanter until we get to it. And we'll talk about why in a second. You can pour the whole bottle, but I'm just gonna pour some of it in there. And I'm going to go ahead and just pour myself a glass of California Cabernet here in a second and talk about some of the descriptors. So last month we did a lot of swirling. We talked about the swirling and the importance of it and lifting those aromas out of the glass. And so I see some of you have worked on your swirling, keeping your wine in the glass, keeping it from bouncing out, but still getting a lot of aromas elevating to the surface so that you can actually smell your wine, which is, of course, the most important part of the whole wine tasting process, is actually smelling. You smell the wine all the way through until you swallow it, because you're still using your olfactory system even when the wine is in your mouth. So really cool. If anybody made it to our trainings, our VIA trainings in Denver or Philadelphia, you guys got a lot of Wine Tasting 101. So you can share that with some of your other colleagues and CEOs. But we're gonna go ahead and swirl, and you can kind of just get your swirl going. You don't wanna fill your glass all the way up to the brim, Tom. You don't want to fill your glass all the way to the brim, because then you can't swirl, right? So I like to keep it, under half or a little bit less. And then you can really swirl the wine, and then you can smell it. Wow. I mean, this is a really pretty wine. Those dark berries, do you see these dark berries that we have on our descriptors? I'm smelling a lot of really pretty dark kind of blackberries. Not quite blueberries in this wine, but a lot of blackberries. And some spice. I get a lot of the spice right now. Is anybody else getting a lot of the barrel spice? Some really pretty kind of allspice. Some toasted notes, like toasted, almost like mocha, chocolate mocha notes. It smells really good. But you definitely get this influence of the wood. You get a little bit of barrel expression in the aromas, which is really pretty, and it complements the fruit. So ideally you have, a good amount of fruit and a good amount of barrel composition to add complexity to the wine. And I think that's really, really there in this wine. It's really pretty and well balanced. So 3 easy steps for wine tasting. We swirl, we smell, and then of course we sip. I think some of you guys might have already tried this, but wow. So I made a berry cobbler last night with a whole bunch of different berries, blackberries, strawberries, blueberries, and then it had like that buttery kind of topper, you know what I mean? That cobbler top. And this is reminding me a lot of that right now. It just has that cobbler, like, baked, savory, a lot of kind of vanilla notes to it. Really, really pretty wine. Now we get to do the fun part where we actually do food and wine pairing. So what I like to suggest, if you've got your rosemary popcorn out, or anything, maybe you have a piece of chocolate, or some leftover crackers or something, but you can go ahead and take a sip of the wine. Then you want to take a bite of your food and take another sip of the wine and see how the wine has actually changed with the food. In the perfect pairing, the wine is better after you've tasted your food. And in a truly perfect world, the food is even better after you've tried the wine. So if you're in a restaurant and they're doing pairings, the chef is always going to want to showcase and show off his food, right? So he's picking the perfect wine that will show off that food. And the really fun way to do this and kind of see how that food changes is if you have a few different wines and a few different cheeses out. And while I believe any cheese can go with any wine and be completely delicious and appropriate, you can really see a difference if you set out some different cheeses and different wines and try each of them, and you'll see sort of like what I mean about maybe the cheese tasting better with the wine too. So really fun to do that if you've got some extra time, which I'm sure you all do. Just have lots of extra time to taste cheese and wine together. So I'll go ahead and take a sip. This is so beautiful. It's so aromatic right now. I can't believe it. I'm going to take a bite of this earthy snack, right? I've got some salt, some grapeseed oil. I've got the rosemary. It's really earthy. And kind of spicy. It's like an earthy, kind of spicy flavor. And then I'm going to try the wine again. So in this pairing, for me, the wine got sort of a more serious edge to it. It kind of got darker. It wasn't just that really pretty fruit cobbler anymore. It was a little bit more intense, a little more serious. Like I could take you to a nice dinner and drink you with a beautiful steak that, of course, maybe you've marinated with garlic and rosemary and sauteed some mushrooms. I mean, delicious, right? So popcorn pairing, super fun way to test out the flavors, low commitment, easy to do, fun for hosting, very inexpensive. You can get really creative, or you can find your local popcorn purveyor. There are a lot of them out there, or your local grocery store that has all these cool popcorn flavors now. And check out one of those and try those with your wine. But in general, I love rosemary with Cabernet. I think it's a really, really great pairing. Let's see. Anybody have any questions or comments about the California Cabernet? Delicious. Go ahead and type them away in the chat box if you do. Some people are getting hungry. I know, it's just a snack. It's just a snack. I had to kick my whole family out. They all went to baseball so I could set up in a quiet kitchen. And you know what they do when they come back? Devour all my popcorn. That's what they do. They come back and devour all of my popcorn. Not fair. All right, so we are going to, let's see, one question. How do you decide which grapes from which vineyards go into the cab? Great question. It's really all a matter of, what we're working on. In the California Cabernet, for instance, which I'm sure is what you're talking about, we want to get a variety of flavors. We want that ripe, really pretty expression. We want the tannins to be ripe because we don't want it to be too peppery or herbal, which it could be if the grapes don't ripen fully. And so we want that really pretty, ripe, plum kind of fruit, ripe expression. So typically we're looking for vineyards in those warmer areas. And of course, we're always looking for, sustainably farmed. We're looking for the right practices, using the right vineyard practices and vineyard management. We're always looking for, well taken care of vineyards and vineyards that we can work with that make the best wines. So that's really how we decide, as we go out and we look and we source grapes from these vineyards that can ripen the Cabernet really well and can produce this style, this really pretty kind of cobbler, fresh, fruit intense, fruit forward. So now we're going to move over to our Napa Cabernet, which I've decanted. I know you guys love decanting. You're always asking me about it. Now, I didn't decant this for very long, you probably noticed, but what decanting does, well, I'm going to go back to this slide over here where we talked about the winemaking process. Decanting, in a way, is like taking a winemaking process into your own hands. Like, I just want this to soften a little bit more than it did in the barrel. So I'm going to have it in my decanter, which does two traditional things. One, it allows for more oxygen to the wine, which allows the tannins to soften, the wine to open up, and kind of have it ready and teed up for enjoyment. Really big wines sometimes do need to open up. Our Howell Mountain Cab, for example, or this Napa Cab is a good example. Our Estate Vineyard Cabernets, those can open up a little bit. Now, I always say that I don't decant things, but that's just because I like to sit there for a long period of time and notice how the wine's changing, and I kind of do my own studying about the wine over the dinner table. But if you want to open the wine and really enjoy it right away, you can definitely decant it. I would say, you could decant it for 1 hour is a pretty good time frame if you wanted to allow your wine to open up. And of course, you could taste it before you decant it and kind of taste it right about before you're going to serve it. And you'll learn something about that decanting process and what that hour did for you, which is just kind of opening up the wine, softening it up a little bit, getting it ready for that meal, that food and wine pairing that you're going to do. When we open our wines, I also wanted to mention on the California Cab, you could open this and leave it open for about 2 to 3 days. You could, of course, drink it longer, so keep it longer and continue to enjoy it. But I would say it's best within like 2 to 3 days for all of our core wines, maybe up to 4 days. With the Napa Cabernet, because we're able to decant it and we have all those rich tannins that are structuring it and holding it together, it can actually be open for longer. So you could really have that open up to 7 days if you wanted to enjoy a glass and go back to it later. And so, 2, 3, 4 days on the core wines, including the whites and reds, and a week, upwards of a week. And then when we get into the iconic wines, sometimes those are like really great when you've left them open for 10 days. Sometimes I've left big cabs open for 2 weeks on my counter, and they've been delicious. So always, of course, depends on the temperatures. That's about, average of maybe about 68 degrees. If you live in a really warm climate, I was just in a warm climate a couple weeks ago, and I realized how fast the wines actually age on the counter in a warm climate. It's real. If you live in Florida or Arizona, it's hard to keep that wine out on your counter for as long as I do up here in Napa Sonoma. So you can chill down the red wine. And in fact, that's one of the questions in our chat box. And I really encourage you, if you live in a warm area, you can chill it. And by the time you have it open for 10, 15 minutes out on the counter, if you live somewhere that's consistently like 75 degrees, almost 80 degrees, within 10 or 15 minutes, it's going to warm right up to just the right temperature so that it's not too warm. I prefer wine that's a little bit cooler than a little bit hotter, but that's just me. Even my reds, I'd rather have them slightly chilled than too warm. But I would say if you're aging them in a cellar, what's the perfect aging temperature? We typically say anywhere from 58 to 62 degrees is a great aging temperature for long term. I've got a couple great chats here in the chat box. Leftover wine, what's that? Or aging wine, what's that? Typically nowadays, we don't keep our wine as long as, people used to. They used to really cellar wines for a long time, and some people still do. But most of us enjoy our wines relatively quickly after purchase. You don't have to worry about long-term aging. But if you're looking at storing your wines and what temperature to serve them at, you should store them between 58 and 62 if you can. Under 70 is kind of the golden rule. And if you're looking to serve them at what temperature, anywhere from 65 to 68 degrees, I think is acceptable. Ideal, let's say that. Anything's acceptable, but ideal. Sometimes it's going to be a little warmer, and if you pulled it out of the fridge, it might be a little cooler. Okay. We've got a question about standing versus on its side. Is that the barrel? Is that what you're talking about with the barrel right there, that picture? Yeah. So this is just the picture for the winemaking process, but typically they're going to be on their sides, and you'll see the opening on the top. Oh, storing the bottle, that is always up for opinion. You can really store the bottle either on its side or upright. I have worked with wine professionals who insist that storing the bottle upright is absolutely better than having it upside down or sideways. And I've had people say, no, it has to be on its side. But typically what we're doing with storing the bottle is trying to keep some moisture in the cork so that it doesn't dry out. And a lot of times the cork quality is a factor in that. So, for everybody here, I would say half of my wine cellar is upright and half of it is on its side, only because I have so much room for wine on its side and to go into this cabinet. And then the other ones are stored in the boxes and they're upright. And I haven't had any problems. So it's kind of one of those traditions, like, which bottle shape should I use? Some of it's tradition and some of it's what your preference is. But there's sort of two schools of thought there. Right, how long? I have Magnums storing upright. How long will they keep? Magnums, that's a great question. Magnums, the 10-year cab, Magnums actually age better than 750s because they have the same sort of size oxygen that can go in and out of the bottle from the cork. So their aging rate is similar to what a 750 milliliter would be, but there's more volume. So they age slower. So Magnums can, they can keep for a long time. The 10-year cab, if it is the 2015 California cab, I would say, enjoy it in the next 5 years. If it is the 2012 Napa Valley cab, we had the two. If it's the 2012 Napa Valley cab, I would say probably 5 to 10 years you could enjoy it, especially in that Magnum format. It'll be really good for a long time. It's a great wine. So moving on to our Napa Valley Cabernet, which I decanted here. This is a really pretty wine. We're going to go ahead and swirl it. I've changed glasses. So I had this little small stemless glass that I poured my California Cab in, and now I went to stemware. What's the difference here is really in the stem, of course, with a stem, without a stem. And the whole purpose of the stem, the history behind that, is really to keep your wine at the right temperature without the temperature of your hands adjusting the wine temperature. And that can be really important for white wines or sparkling wines if you want to keep them cold. But for reds, and actually for whites for me too, because I like them a little bit warmer, you can use either glass. It's really a matter of preference. You've seen me using Italian water glasses before. I'm not picky about the glass. Sometimes when I'm opening a really expensive bottle, I just go, I'm going to use really nice stemware because it's fancy and I'm going to enjoy this glass of wine. And I'm really going to, have a bigger bowl. This is called the bowl right here. You can have a bigger bowl to swirl and smell and enjoy. But you can use anything, right? So I'm just showing you two different options. And moving into this Napa Valley Cab, we're going to go ahead and swirl. Swirling kind of starts to become second nature, huh? When you've swirled a bunch of wines, you're like, oh, yeah, I could do that. Now, when you smell, we talked about this before too, you actually really have to smell the wine. You can't just go like this. Oh, yeah. I don't know. I don't get any of it because you didn't get in there. So the whole point of the bowl with the wine is that you're going to swirl and then you're going to stick your nose in there and smell. So you smell. Wow. Isn't that a big difference? Did you guys try both of those things? Like when you keep your nose outside of the glass, you just can barely, I mean, this is really aromatic wine, so I can smell a lot, but not as nearly as much as I can smell when I stick my nose in the glass, which is why it's shaped like this, guys. Isn't that cool? This is just so rich, and you can smell sort of this touch of finesse. Like it's complex and hard to describe, right? It's like chocolatey, but there's fruit. There's that really pretty like plum and just chocolate, a little bit of spice. It's like you can smell almost the weight of the wine because there's a lot going on and all of them are in perfect balance and harmony, right? It's hard. Not one specific thing is sticking out when you smell it. It's just you have to keep going back to smell more. So a touch of floral. We've got violet on the tasting notes. Sometimes you don't get a chance to smell violet, but there are those little violet candies. There's some French violet candies that are out there, and you can try those if you don't have a chance to actually smell a violet. But there are some high notes. So those high floral notes in Cabernet really come from that cool night, that growing season, and that very special geographical place that allows for these aromatic nuances to really range from dark blackberry to violet, and then the chocolate is kind of part of those tannins and that richness of the skins and seeds being really ripe, and also part of our barrel toasting and barrel aging program. It just smells so good. You just want to keep smelling it, right? That's why I love wine. It's so interesting. So we can go ahead and taste it now. Wow. So it's really fun to compare different wines and see what's really different about them. And we talked about just the difference in where they're grown primarily as being a difference and a distinguishing factor. The climate in the Napa Valley is so particular that it grows a particular type of Cabernet fruit, and it ripens in a particular way that's this very intense expression, right? It's really intense, and you can taste the weight of that wine. I was thinking about the term full-bodied this morning. I was walking around the house and I'm like, full-bodied. Okay, everybody uses it, but they're always using it for wine. But let's compare full-bodied to some other things you might drink or eat, okay? Just to kind of make it relative, like full-bodied, like a latte. If I'm gonna have a latte or a cappuccino, I would say it's more full-bodied than a cup of coffee or like an iced coffee, right? An iced coffee is kind of thin. It's delicious, there's richness and complexity, but it's kind of thin. But when I add the milk to it, it becomes a little bit more full-bodied, right? And especially if I've now frothed that milk, then it's like really full-bodied. And then I add like a little cinnamon on top, or like a, crazy Starbucks drink with like all kinds of whipped cream and toppings and caramel. And that's like, whoa, that is full-bodied and rich and complex, right? So I was thinking about that and just trying to come up with a couple of similarities and ways to communicate this like texture and weight and full-bodied nature of wines, and how you could relate those to other drinks or maybe other foods that you have. But if you use honey, for instance, that richness and viscosity, it's really different than having the same amount of sugar in water. Or in a simple syrup. They're really different. They have richness to them, and part of it is just the texture. And that's part of what we're communicating with the Napa Valley, and that rich, opulent texture and weight is those textures are different because of the tannins. And those tannins, of course, came from the skins and seeds, which I'll just go back here and talk about, is our number one ingredient. It's grapes. So a lot of that comes from the skins and the seeds and that richness of the grape product and the barrel aging. We went from French and American oak on our California core Cabernet, and now we're exclusively French oak for a longer duration on our Napa Valley Cab. And that actually adds some structure and richness to the wine, as well as softening it. I have a great question here. I mentioned certain vintages should be enjoyed in a certain amount of time. Are we given the information for each vintage, or is there an overall aging period for all the wine, drunk young or aged for a number of years for best quality? That's a really good question. For all of our core wines, we really make those to be best enjoyed in the next 5 to 7 years. But I would say best enjoyed in the next 5 years. Enjoy that fresh fruit. As we move into our reserve and iconic wines, we're talking about longer periods of time, and that's because of those unique growing locations where the grapes are sourced and the intensity and weight of the tannin structure. So we don't necessarily have aging and cellaring like a timeline or guidelines, but as I was mentioning, you know, they do lengthen for each sort of range or tier of our wines. Can I quickly talk about the difference between the French and American oak? Yes, so French and American oak, I won't talk too long about this because I want to get to a couple more tasting notes here before we wrap up. But do watch the Facebook post from today and from last week, because I talked a lot about French and American oak. And so I really want you to check that out. But French and American oak, basically, there's 2 different species. They come from different forests throughout America and throughout France. America primarily grows white oak, and in France, they primarily grow brown oak, different species. And so they have sort of different characteristics, but typically you'll see a little more spice in the French oak, and you're going to see a little more vanilla, coconut, more vanilla expression in American oak. All right, so let me come back to the chat box. So when you went ahead and you swirled and you smelled all that amazing stuff in there, and then you sipped, and then you get to pair with the popcorn. So it's just so rich and delicious. And it kind of, this wine really like asks you to have food, right? I mean, you could sit here and drink a glass, no problem. That'd be delicious. But if you had food, it would even be more enjoyable, right? So take a little bite of popcorn and then go back to the wine. Wow. Wow, it really brightened the fruit for me. So it went more from the dark berries to more of kind of like the cherry, kind of brighter fruit, a little bit more of the violet and barrel complexity. It really changed a lot. It's really interesting. I like it. I love rosemary with Cabernet. So that's something fun that you can do. When we're comparing these 2 wines, on other ways that we can compare, we've talked a lot about the body and weight and concentration of the wine, just by nature of different growing locations. We've talked a little bit about the balance of the wine and that full-bodiedness. When we start talking about like milk, for instance, we're talking about something that has very low acid, low acidity. And so in reds, you're going to have that lower acidity typically than whites. That's why whites come across, you know, so crisp. They have a higher acidity to them. So with reds, you have a little bit more full-bodied nature just in the fact that they're typically lower acidity too. And that's something that's important when you're playing with food and wine pairings and you want to try something unique. But for other general pairings for Cabernet, of course, it doesn't always have to be big meat. People always gravitate toward meat. If you're a meat eater, you're in luck. Cabernet is awesome. It really builds with the big flavors, and it also has the tannin and acidity to cut the fat. So it's a really balanced meal when you do that pairing. But if you don't eat meat, there's also a lot of other great options. In our last seasonal supplement, we highlighted a beet risotto recipe, which is delicious. Beets are really great. You can do any kind of thing with barbecue sauce. And you just want something that's really going to build on the flavors and the weight. So kind of staying away from anything that's too light and adding kind of that richness, whether it's chocolate, even cocoa powder. If you were to make like enchiladas or tacos or something like that, and adding cocoa powder, like a mole sauce, you have to, you can think about it in that way, and adding those richness factors in other ways besides meat too. So chocolate, great pairing with Cabernet, of course. I like to sit down in the evening at 9 o'clock. I watch news. I have a glass of red wine. I have a piece of dark chocolate. And then I watch my news and I go to bed. It's my routine. If it's a good night, that's my routine. So I know it sounds kind of boring, but I like it. But Cabernet and chocolate, no arguing, that's a great pairing too. So a lot of great pairings for summer. Cabernet doesn't just have to be for the winter either. You can serve it in the summer with all of your barbecue, especially kind of later in the evenings as things cool down. It's nice to have a glass of Cabernet. I love it. So here's some more of the pairings. You guys might see this with our Cabernet can. Fun new infographic. But like I mentioned, you can do a tender cut of beef with rosemary. You can do those rich chocolates. You can do earthy beets. You can do spaghetti and meatballs. I mean, it doesn't need to be complex, right? Spaghetti and meatballs are awesome. You can make your meatballs or buy your meatballs, and you're really going to enjoy it because it's a hearty meal, right? Coffee is another fun, creative pairing where you can use coffee as a crust on your meats, or you can add coffee to barbecue sauce and make sort of an espresso barbecue. That's really good. So coffee is kind of a fun one to play with. If you, I'm thinking if you're doing like hosting a party for Autism Awareness Month and you want to try some fun pairings, you could make like a coffee flavored, you can make coffee flavored frosting, for cupcakes, like little tiny muffins, just something cheap and easy. None of this has to be super expensive for hosting. You can have some pistachios. You could add pistachios to the top of some other dish that you already have that would add that real kind of buttery flavor and texture and complement the wine. So there's just a few fun little ideas and suggestions for further pairings for a lot of you who I know love to cook and pair your wines and recommend them to your friends who love cooking and being in their kitchens. And I know somebody might ask, so yes, this will be on Via University and you can check it out and reference this if you want. So let's talk about some keywords and phrases that we learned, and we'll wrap it up here. I've got 5 minutes. Wow, I always think I'm going to finish early, and I never do. Tannin. So we talked about tannins. Those are actually phenolic compounds found in grape skin and seeds, stems, and in oak barrels. So those are sort of our primary sources of tannins. We talk about sweet. Sometimes we talk about sweetness, and that is a wine with residual grape sugar, and dry is absent of sugar. One thing I didn't mention here is that our Napa Valley Cabernet is a little bit drier than our California Cabernet. It's a little sweeter. It's not sweet, what I would call sweet, but it has a sweetness from the really ripe, warm regions that the grapes are grown in, and they tend to just accentuate the sweetness of that ripe fruit, like if you were to bite into a fresh, sweet, ripe plum. We talked about barrel aging, which is this period of time after fermentation when wine is placed in small oak barrels to gain structure and tannin and aromatic contributions from the oak. The small amounts of oxygen allow the wine tannins to evolve and integrate into the oak. We talked a little bit about French oak, but there's more on Facebook about oak in my 3-part series. Next week is our 3rd part of our oak series on Facebook Q&A, Tuesdays at 10:30. But this is a specific type of oak grown in forests throughout central France, all over through France. The different forests actually have different names, and it gets really kind of fun to select and choose your oak from different regions of France that have different characteristics that can contribute to your specific wine. And that's, of course, what we use exclusively for our Napa Valley Cabernet. Napa Valley is an American viticultural area, an AVA, which is situated in Northern California. The region spans from the San Francisco Bay to north of Calistoga and in between the Mayacamas and Baca mountain ranges. So it's a specific valley right there in the northern kind of Bay Area, just north of San Francisco. If you haven't been there, hope to see you guys there at Crash. And an AVA is an American viticultural area. This is the grape growing region that's distinguished by geographical features and boundaries that are recognized and defined by the federal government. Some form of AVA or American viticultural area is really used throughout the world, throughout grape growing regions, to help people define where those climates and soils and different types of grapes are grown so that they can communicate quality to customers. So the AVA, American viticultural areas, are really important to learning more about wines and where they come from and just how rare some of these places actually are, how small the area can be, and how high of quality the wines can be. Napa Valley is actually much smaller than the Bordeaux region of France. So it's a very small AVA. And when you travel around the world, you don't see a lot of Napa Valley wines. They're very rare, very exclusive, and very enjoyable. They're delicious. So just want to give a shout out real quick here, but probably the most important part of our tasting really is what our Cabernet can do. You know, any Cabernet can be paired with rosemary. Any Cabernet can be paired with chocolate and coffee and enjoyed and decanted and opened with a corkscrew and poured in 2 different types of glasses and grown in all these premier regions. But no Cabernet, but ONEHOPE Cabernet can give back to autism through our cause partner Act Today. And that is why we're all here. So super cool. So with our California Core, every 10 cases help fund 1 hour of ABA therapy for a child with autism. And for our Napa Valley Cab, 2 cases help fund 1 hour of ABA therapy for a child with autism. I want to just think about that for a second, because how cool, first of all, that is what our Cabernet can do for the world, for you guys, for the world, for our cause partners, and for all these children who, you know, really need this therapy. But take a look at the difference there, because the reserve wine will, in 2 cases, will help fund the 1 hour, where it takes 10 cases in the California Core. So I did have somebody this week that said, I know this sounds weird, but one of my friends wants to host a party with all reserves. And I was like, yes, I'm so excited, because the impact is really significant in the reserve wine. So as you're going out, you know, with your Cabernet and you're booking tastings, I just want you to remember too that the reserve collection makes more of an impact. You know, our reserve rosé, for instance, is double the amount of women who are educated about ovarian cancer from our core collection. So these reserves are not only really created in these small regions and handcrafted and very, you know, small production, but they also make a really big impact. So it's just really cool, and I wanted to also let you guys know that to date, we have provided 3,318 hours of ABA therapy through our Cause Partner Act today. That is so cool. So good job, everybody. That's because of you guys. And that is where we leave it on this magical note of One Hope and making a difference. Thank you for uncorking change with me tonight. Together, we make a difference. This is a great community. If you're new tonight, I hope you had a really fun time. Encourage your friends to come. This is a place where we all learn together and share our love and passion for making a difference and making an impact, and wine too. So on that note, I want to remind everyone to always drink our wines responsibly, and our next tasting, Grape to Glass, is May 15th, Tuesday, just 1 month from today, where we are going to highlight rosé all day. Oh yeah, we are going to be tasting 2 of our rosés and talking about our whole rosé portfolio. We should have May flowers with all these April showers. They're supposed to bring May flowers. So hopefully we'll have some sunny weather and we can sip some rosé together next month. Thank you all for joining, and I want to have you all to have a great night. Cheers, and thanks for coming.